Harold's Fairy Tale by Crockett Johnson. It's a little book. Harold's Fairy Tale. To the Enchanted Garden. Ooh, looks like you have enchanted animals too. One evening, Harold got out of bed and took his purple crayon and the moon along and went for a walk in an enchanted garden. Nothing grew in it. If he had known it was an enchanted garden, Harold scarcely would have called it a garden at all. To find out what the trouble was, Harold decided to ask the king. Kings live in large castles. Harold had to make sure the castle was big enough to be the king's. He didn't want to waste his time talking to any princes or earls or dukes. Look at this line at the top. That's a box line. Box lines are good for drawing castles. Let's practice. Go across and down, across and up, across and down, across and up, across and down, across and up, across and down. So to make a castle, we would take a big line up, across and down, across and 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 up, across and back all the way down. To make a fancy door, we would draw a curvy line with a line down the middle. Then we would have a castle. If we wanted, we could add tall towers on each side. For those, we really have to back up here. Really long line up, across and down, across and up, across and down, across and up, across and down, across and up, and really long line back down next to the big building, a very tall tower. This was a king's castle, all right. It had 2 tall towers and a big draw gate to keep out the people the king didn't want to see. See the curvy line? But when the draw gate was drawn closed, it kept Harold out too. Harold shouted for the king to come down and let him in, but the gate didn't open. He walked along the edge of the enchanted garden beside the smooth wall of the castle until he thought of his purple crayon. A person smaller than a very small mouse would be able to get in. Without even bending, he walked into a very small mouse hole. Look, he drew a big mouse, and then he walked in the mouse's hole. He walked through the mouse hole into the castle. He invited the mouse in too, but the mouse preferred to stay outside. As he gazed around inside the big castle, Harold felt very tiny. And a king might not pay much attention to anybody who was smaller than a mouse. So Harold used his purple crayon again. He made sure he was as tall as 4.5 steps of stairs, his usual height. If you look carefully at these stairs, they look like a zigzag line that's been tipped. Can you see how it goes? Zig, zag, zig, zag, zig, zag, zig, zag, zig, with stops between each turn so that they stay nice and pointy. Then he climbed up the stairs looking for the king. He went up and up and up and up until he got so tired he couldn't climb another step. Luckily, there were no more steps. He had reached the top. He still couldn't find the king, but he remembered kings sat on thrones. The king's throne looked very comfortable. Harold thought the king wouldn't mind if he rested a few minutes. He sat on the throne wondering what it was like to be king and wear a crown. He tried it with the king's crown. Can you see another zigzag line? Zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. He made a crown with a zigzag line. Let's make a crown for ourselves, okay? Up above your head. Zigzag, 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 and down again. I have a crown, and you have a crown. It was all right for a while, but the crown began to feel heavy. So Harold put it on the king's head. As he thanked the king for the loan of the crown, he noticed the king looked sad, no doubt because of the garden. He asked the king if the trouble was due to a witch or a giant. The king couldn't say which. He looked sad and helpless. Suddenly, the giant or witch, evidently the giant or witch, if the king couldn't tell which it was invisible. But Harold told the king not to worry. He set off to find the invisible witch or giant, brandishing his purple crayon, and accidentally made a hole in the wall. The accident embarrassed Harold, but the hole was the handiest way out of the castle, and he climbed through it. Can you see how he used that curved line to make a circle window? Can you do in this air? Circles are kind of hard to do on paper. They're easier in the air. Good job. When he looked down from the other side of the hole, he realized he had forgotten how high up he was. He needed something tall to climb down, something as tall as a steeple. To fill the hole in the castle, Harold put a handsome and useful clock in it. He was surprised how late it was. He slid down the steeple, the steep kind of roof, to find the invisible witch or giant right away. It wasn't a steeple, it was a pointed hat. It was a giant witch. The purple crayon made it plain. It was an invisible giant witch. Well, no wonder nothing grew in the enchanted forest garden. How could anything grow, Harold said to himself, with a giant witch trampling around with big feet? Now that he saw what the trouble was, all Harold had to do was drive the witch out of the enchanted garden. Mosquitoes! Mosquitoes, Harold knew, will drive anybody out of a garden. How many fingers does the witch have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many fingers do you have? I have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She has more than I have. The mosquitoes drove out the witch. They were also driving Harold out of the garden. He had to make smoke to get rid of the mosquitoes. Can you see this line? This is bumpy. A bump, a bump, a bump. A bump, 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 a bump. Can you draw that with me? A bump, a bump, a bump, a bump. Andy had once heard somebody say that where there's smoke, there must be fire. To put out the fire, he first thought of fire engines, but he decided to make it rain. Rain was easier. Can you see the dash lines? Dash lines are short lines. Dash, 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 dash. Can I do a little bit and lift up and a little more and lift up? The rain soaked everything. Harold, too. But he said, it's good for the flowers, and he was right. Soon there were flowers. Beautiful flowers popped up all over the enchanted garden, more than Harold was able to count, and all in gorgeous bloom. Harold thought how delighted and happy the king would be when he looked out from the castle in the morning. And then, amazingly, the last flower turned out to be not a flower at all, but a lovely fairy. She held out her magic wand, as fairies always do when they're giving somebody wishes that will come true. Harold couldn't think of anything to wish for, but to be polite, he took one wish and told the fairy he'd use it later. Besides, Harold thought, as he started his long walk home, a wish might come in handy someday. After all the excitement, he suddenly felt tired, and he stopped to rest a while. He sat on a small rug because the ground was still somewhat damp from the rain. Can you see it? He drew that with straight lines. And he wished the rug was a flying carpet. At once, Harold felt it rise in the air. It flew fast and high, but when it went so fast, it left the moon behind. Harold realized he did not know how to stop the carpet or even how to slow it. He wished he had taken 2 wishes from the fairy so he could wish the flying carpet would land. But he did have his purple crayon. He landed the fine carpet in his living room, right behind the high-backed chair his mother sat in knitting. And he asked her to read him a story before he went to bed. Harold's Fairy Tale. It's a fun book with lots of lines. We learned about straight and box lines. We talked about bumpy lines and dash lines and curved lines. So many lines. We can use lots of different lines to draw different kinds of pictures, just like Harold.